Itinerant, and his name is John Franklin Dyer. And he said that he preached to 250 placer miners at Minersville. In addition, there were placer miners up around Schofield Pass, placer miners up the Slate River, and around Minersville, they took out an estimated $1 million worth of gold. Now, we're talking about placer gold or gold panning, the day of the individual miner. And that means an individual with a gold pan reaches down, scoops out a little debris out of the bottom of Washington Gulch, and then with water in the gold pan, gently rotates it downhill. And all of the light stuff runs off. And then with forceps, they took out the little pebbles that were on the bottom that didn't float out, and then poured a little mercury in the bottom of the gold pan. And mercury amalgamates with gold. And gold is heavy. It did not flow out of the gold pan. What was left in the bottom of that pan was always called pay dirt. The dirt on the bottom of the pan that pays. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this. Gold at that time was selling at about $16 an ounce, set by the federal government. Today, gold is selling on the New York Stock Exchange at a little over $4,100. So do the mathematics and find out what, by today's prices, was taken out of Minersville. So there's a lot of gold in this area very early. And then in 1867, the federal government sponsored 4 expeditions, survey teams, to go out into the West. Nobody knew what was out here. You know, when we bought the Louisiana Purchase from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains and the Canadian border and then down somewhere near Texas, that was in dispute. Lewis and Clark explored the northern area from 1804 to 1806. Zebulon Pike took a look at the southern area, 1806 and 1807, but these guys came through an area and kept right on going, so they passed through an area in one day. So they didn't know really was out here. So this is going to be the first scientific survey of the American West. We are going to eliminate unbelievable rumors that everybody knew were not true. Hot water spouting 100 feet out of the ground somewhere. Everybody knew that damn lie. Indians living in 4-story buildings inside of the walls of caves and mountains. Everybody knew that was a damn lie. And a river that ran through a tremendous canyon and ran to where God knows where. Everybody knew that was a lie. So in they came. John Wesley Powell, down the Colorado River. George Wheeler, Wyoming. And then one of the guys was a fellow by the name of Ferdinand Vanderveer Hayden. And he was right here in 1874. And he stood on top of Mount Teocalli at 13,208 feet, looked off in the distance, saw 2 high peaks, and he named them the Crested Buttes. Later on, they thought that one more resembled a Gothic cathedral, hence Gothic Peak. And then all they did was drop the S off of Crested Butte, the Crested Butte. So Crested Butte Mountain, that's how it got its name. So Hayden was here in 1874 taking a look at Indian land. The Ute Indians still owned the land. And then around the late 1870s, silver miners began to come into an area around Lake City and Leadville and Georgetown, and in they came into the Gunnison country. And 5 great silver camps opened up in the Gunnison country. One of them was 10 miles to the west of here called Irwin. One of them was 8 miles north of here called Gothic. Another one was right on the base of Monarch Pass at the headwaters of Tamichi Creek called White Pine. One was on Quartz Creek called Pitkin, and one was on the edge of Taylor Park called Tin Cup. Each one of them had between 1,000 and 4,000 people in them during the early 1880s. Today in the Gunnison country, in Gunnison County, we have about 17,000 people. In 1881 and 1882, in the summers, 25 to 40,000 people lived in the Gunnison country. And it was a floating population, because in the winter there weren't that many people here. And there was great optimism in the air. Railroad was headed in, smelters went up, investors with names like Rockefeller and Studebaker and DuPont and James Grant of Leadville all came in. And it looked like this thing was really going to go and maybe become another Leadville. And then the early route into Crested Butte from 1879 to 1881 had nothing to do with current Highway 135. The major route went from Gunnison, up Ohio Creek, over Ohio Pass, and into Irwin, and then came into Crested Butte by the Pioneer Wagon Road. Some of you may have biked that Pioneer Wagon Road, which basically ran from Irwin right on into Crested Butte. That all changed on November 21, 1881, when the Denver and Rio Grande Narrow Gauge Railroad headed out of Denver and went to Colorado Springs. And William Jackson Palmer started that town. You'll see him on horseback in the middle of Nevada Avenue. Glen Eyrie is home. The Antlers Hotel for all the elk that he shot. And a whole bunch of other things in Colorado Springs. Then he went down to Pueblo, started the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. More about that later. From there was up the Arkansas River into Salida, which meant the exit in Spanish. And then over Marshall Pass, a parallel pass to Monarch Pass, to Meechee Creek into Gunnison, August 6, 1881. Wasted no time, because William Jackson Palmer knew that it needed coal to run a railroad. And as a result, the Rio Grande ran 27 miles right up along current Highway 135, and into Crested Butte, arriving here on November 21st, 1881. Narrow gauge railroad tracks 3 feet wide. Very utilitarian in the mountains. You can go up steeper grades, go around sharper curves, be built for less money, and be built with less ballast. They used to say, on time, any time. And it was slow, obviously, in the mountains. And there's a classic story told about how slow the train was coming from Gunnison to Crested Butte. Young lady walks up to the conductor, said, "Can't this damn train go any faster? I'm about ready to have a baby." Conductor wagged his finger under the woman's nose and said, "Madam, you should have thought about this before you get on the damn train." The woman wagged her finger under the conductor's nose and said, "I wasn't in this condition when I got on this train." Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's a slow train. But when the Rio Grande entered Crested Butte, that was the end of the Pioneer Wagon Road and the major route from Ohio Pass, because now you could come by rail. Mail carried in the early days by the legendary Al Johnson and his brother Fred from the town of Crystal. Up the Crystal Canyon, past the Devil's Punch Bowls, over Schofield Pass, past Emerald Lake, into Gothic and into Crested Butte, skiing in the wintertime, horseback in the summertime. He became a legend. One of the great skiers in the history of the Gunnison country, and a little later on in January when I talk about skiing, we'll talk about that legendary race with he and Charlie Bainey off of Gibson Ridge. Even as silver was going great guns, Crested Butte at that time became known as the gateway to the Elk Mountains. It was the supply town, the railroad town, and the investing town for all the silver mining camps. It supplied them. And then everybody kind of figured out that even though this was a great silver area opening up, Crested Butte had a lot of coal around it. And one guy named Howard Smith bought up a bunch of coal lands 4 miles up the Slate River in an area the locals today call Cloud City, but we call Smith Hill Anthracite. More about that in a little bit. And then in the 1880s, silver sold at $1 an ounce. And because of international politics, the price of silver began to plummet. And it went down in 1893, in the Panic of 1893, to 58 cents an ounce. And on top of that, none of the silver camps in the Gunnison country had high-grade silver. This was not another Telluride, Uray, or Silverton, or Georgetown. All the veins were knife blade seams, so we didn't have the high-grade ore. And as a result, all those silver camps plummeted and became ghost towns. Irwin, Pitkin, White Pine, Tin Cup, Gothic, nobody there. A couple thousand people left, didn't have the silver. And now Crested Butte turned to its destiny, and its destiny was coal. On January the 24th, 1884, just on the west side of Crested Butte, as you head up the hill, they have the Jokerville mine. And on that day, at about 7:30 in the morning, a loud explosion killed 61 miners in the Jokerville mine, in the worst mining disaster up to that time in Colorado history, and still the third worst today. And all of those miners were from northwestern Europe. They were Protestant. They were from Cornwall, Ireland, England, Scotland, and Wales. 46 are buried together in a common grave in the Crested Butte Cemetery. Seeping methane gas. The Jokerville reopened for another year or two, but by 1890 it was done. It was too dangerous. And then a lot of other mines began to open up in Crested Butte. As you come in from Gunnison and a little bit to the south of Crested Butte on the right side of the road, you're going to see black splotches on the side of the hill. And that is where the Buckley mine was, where the Pueblo mine was, and where the Robinson mines were. All three of those mines were bituminous coal mines. The Denver Rio Grande ran right underneath, and the coal came out of the mine, down the tramway, into the tipple, loaded up in the Rio Grande, and took it out. Bituminous or soft coal. Right on today's lower loop, where the Gronk is today. The old-timers don't like to have me say that. That is where the Pershing coal mine was, another bituminous mine. If you keep going out to the west and to the north, you come to Peanut Lake, and then right above Peanut Lake was another bituminous coal mine called the Peanut Mine. So now we got three coming into Crested Butte. We got two on the lower loop. We got the Jokerville, which blew up. And 4 miles up the Slate River, we have a great anthracite or hard coal mine at Smith Hill. Smith Hill, 1,600 feet above, that's where the mine was, the coal mine was. And all that coal came down on a gravity tram. And a gravity tram means that the full coal cars going downhill pulled the empty coal cars going uphill. Didn't need any power. And down below was the largest anthracite coal breaker west of Connellsville, Pennsylvania, 5 stories high, 1883, built for $100,000, and that was called anthracite. And that's where the hard coal was broken up. And the Rio Grande had a 4-mile spur that ran right up to it and then took it out. It takes care of that mine. Now we got another mine about 14 miles to the west, 1898 to 1925, and that one was called Floresta, another great anthracite mine. Now you'll see a photo of that here in a little bit. The breaker that went in there was 5 stories high, built for $98,000, and that now became the largest coal breaker west of Connellsville, Pennsylvania. So we had 2 of them in the Gunnison country. The one problem with Floresta was the train could only run about 5 months out of the year. That's a big snow belt, and you'll see some photos of that a little bit later on. And one mine to go. And that mine was the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company out of Pueblo. That was their big mine, located on the bench in the shadows of Gibson Ridge. It opened up in 1894, closed in 1952, 58 years of operation, 3rd largest coal mine in the state. 400 workers, 70 mules, 7 miles of tunnels underneath Gibson Ridge. And the railroad, of course, running right out in front of it. And right below the mine were 154 coke ovens. Now I'm going to tell you why Crested Butte was very important as a part of the Industrial Revolution of the United States. Where I come from in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, we had as many people, 100,000, that went out to the California Gold Rush in 1849 in the same year. And they came for the iron and the copper and the lumber. So right nearby where I grew up, we got towns with names like Iron River, Iron Mountain, Ironwood, Calumet, and Bessemer. Now, what we had to do, the power of the U.S. Industrial Revolution and around the world, we needed to convert iron into steel. Iron melts at 2,300 degrees. Steel melts at 4,700 degrees. And if you put hardeners of steel in, it melts at a higher rate. So one of the things you need to convert iron into steel is coke. And that came out of those 154 coke ovens, which you burned the bituminous coal for 24 hours red hot. And then when it cooled, it was called slag, taken to the CF&I steel mill in Pueblo. On the east side of Monarch Pass, you drive by it all the time, they got a big limestone quarry. Of 1800, with the largest school in the Gunnison country. The population plummeted to 300 in the 1950s and the early 1960s. There wasn't anybody here. Everybody had to leave. There were no jobs. They went to Somerset, they went to Paonia, they went to Trinidad, they went to Pueblo to get jobs. The only people who stayed were the old-timers, who were too old to work anymore and they're just going to retire. A couple of bars existed, Stefanic's store existed, the gas station, which was right here, Tony's Conoco existed, and that was about it. Crested Butte had one more problem historically, and that was fire. Anytime you got buildings made out of wood and very close together with little fire protection in the winter, you're going to have problems. They had bad fires in 1890, 1893, 1901, and 1909. And in the fire of 1893, it looked like, with the wind blowing, it was going to take out half the town. And as a result, they decided to blow up 2 buildings that would maybe make, eliminate the fire from spreading. But they forgot that in those 2 buildings they blew up, there was dynamite, blasting powder, and gasoline and fuel oil in the buildings. And the ensuing blast not only took out those 2 buildings, it took out 4 more, and blew a big hole in the side of the fire hall. You'll see that, which is a gallery today. So this is Crested Butte now in 1960. And I came in 1962, about a year too late, for the ski area opening, because in 1961, Crested Butte moved out of the age of coal and into the age of snow. A fellow by the name of Dick Eflin, who had a friend while he was in the Air Force in Germany, had been in Crested Butte, and Dick always wanted to start a ski area. Came here with the guy with the money, his fraternity brother, Fred Rice, and they bought the Molensic Ranch at the base of Crested Butte Mountain. And they got a Forest Service permit to start a ski area. Dick Eflin walked into Tony's Tavern, now the Wooden Nickel, talked to Tony Capuchin, the bartender, and wowing Tony with, he says, so beautiful around here. And Tony Capuchin said, you can't eat scenery. That's kind of how the old-timers felt about it. So, during the winter of 1961 and 62, they put up a J-bar, a T-bar, and a rope tow. And Crested Butte ski area was now underway. An Italian gondola went in January of 63. We missed by 1 month of beating Vail out for the first gondola in Colorado. And Father Leo McKenna of Gunnison blessed it with holy water, which was an Italian tradition. Whereupon the gondola broke down right out of the house, went 50 feet, broke down for the rest of the day. And Father McKenna slipped in the parking lot and fractured his kneecap on the way to his vehicle. A very inauspicious beginning. The ski area went into bankruptcy in 1966. Kansas banks took it over. The Callaway Walton family bought it. 1970 ran to 2004. Then the Mullers from Sunapee and Okemo in the east ran it from 2004 to 2019, and here we are today with Vail. Crested Butte is a very unique town, and I'm going to give you a few things that are unique about it. Number one, there are very few areas in the United States that can say that they have produced gold, silver, lead, copper, zinc, molybdenum, marble, and coal in one area. But in and around this area we did. 8 miles away from here, 3 miles up Cement Creek, we had the first chairlift in Colorado, ski area, ski chairlift at Pioneer Ski Area. On top of that, we had the second and third X Games here at Crested Butte. 1998, 1999. First one in California, the latter one's over in Aspen. Gina Croft, the director of marketing, was responsible for that. Largest coal breakers in the United States west of Pennsylvania. Birth of mountain biking with Marin County, California. Industrial revolution involving steel. Galande jumpers, pioneering. Extreme skiers, pioneers. And 6 14,000-foot mountains outside our door. I will now shut up, and we are going to go to the slides, and I'm going to step off to the side, and I will have our ace with the clicker there go.